Right then, just a day after his infamous tariff threat of 25%, US President Donald Trump has engaged in rhetoric with India yet again. The US president has sparked controversy by labeling India alongside Russia as quote-unquote a dead economy, claiming that the United States does, again, quote-unquote, very little business with this country. His comments made on his platform, Truth Social, come even as tensions escalate over his threat of imposing a 25% tariff on India. Now, is Trump's terming of India a dead economy justified? And more importantly, what will be the fallout of the president's latest remarks on the country? To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by Gaurav Sengupta, Chief Economist at IDFC First Bank, and Rajani Sinha, Chief Economist at the Care Edge Group. Gaurav, let me start by asking you, we'll come to the fallout in just a bit, but at the get-go, it occurs to me that the irony couldn't write itself more. A country with a 3% growth rate making international headlines as it registers these numbers, calling a country like India, estimated 6.4% growth rate, a dead economy. The irony really couldn't be a lot more stark than this. Don't you agree?
It's a negotiating tactic. So basically, that's the President Trump playbook. Basically, use as much as it's more like a shock and awe move where they push a trading partner in a corner, they put a very high level of tariffs, and they are, it's a very sort of a negotiation tactic. And ultimately, even for the US, a country like India is important. For example, for one of the key exports from India that go to the US is pharmaceuticals. One of the reasons why the healthcare costs in the US economy to a certain extent is still affordable is because of the pharma sector exports of India. So it's very difficult for, let's say, US to just shut countries out. This is a negotiating tactic. We definitely expect that maybe by August end, September end, India could have a trade deal with the US. I guess the delay in the deal between the two countries is also showing that India is pushing back, that India is trying to make sure that its interests, especially in agriculture, the dairy sector, and also the manner in which India is able to reduce the tariffs in a more phased manner, like the way India is able to achieve with the deal with the UK. They're asking for the same terms. So I would say it's a temporary setback, and also the hard line that is taken by the US economy, it's more of a negotiating tactic.
Rajni, if I could just come to you. I know for a fact that it's more of a negotiating tactic, like Gaurav was mentioning. But surely, at a time when the Indian economy is moving from strength to strength, both in terms of manufacturing and services, the country has really, notched up some major milestones. Surely the term dead economy, many economists would say, would be rather harsh, if not completely ridiculous, if I might add. What do you think are the main strong points that the country comes with, which would probably, make this remark one that we might just shrug off our shoulders, if you will? And how do you think India will respond to a remark like this coming from no less than the highest office in the United States?
So, absolutely, this comment is far from reality. If you look at the situation right now, India is the only large economy which is also recording high growth. So we are in that unique position. If we look at the three largest economy, US, China, US, if I look at the next 5-year growth, it's expected to grow by around 2% or so. If I look at China's next 5-year growth, it's expected to be in the range of 3 to 4%. If you look at India's next 5-year growth expectation, it's around 6.5%. So definitely India has a complete edge and this unique position of being a large economy and recording high growth. So one that. Second, India in fact has an advantage right now in many positions. Um, India is like the office to the world. The way India's service sector is performing, IT, ITS, then business consulting services, India's share in services exports have been increasing. And in fact, that's also a reason why India would be relatively less impacted by this Trump tariff. So, Overall, if we look at India's exposure to US in terms of goods exports, it's around 2% of our GDP, which is not very high. If you look at some of the other economies,
Right.
like say Vietnam, Thailand, while they are now going to have lower tariff than what is proposed for India, but their exposure to US is much higher. So in that sense, India is relatively insulated. Moreover, for India, the strong point is India's services sector exports, and that would be out of this tariff arena. So in that sense, India is in a much better position.
Right. Right, right.
As
So
to
Gaurav,
your
if I could
other
just come back to you,
question,
like Rajani was saying, India more or less. Yes, yes, yes. Go on, Rajani.
yeah. So you also asked me this other question as to how Indian government is going to react to that. To that, I would say, I
Is
would
likely to
repeat what,
respond. Yes.
yeah, I would repeat what Gaura said. It's more of a negotiation tactics, and it's just to put pressure on government. But if you see, India is going to be very careful with the trade negotiation going forward. Even they are not going to be in a hurry to rush into any agreement. And I think that makes sense, because India as an economy, there are some sectors, specifically what India is concerned about is agri, dairy, and these sectors, we are not prepared to completely open up these sectors. So it makes a lot of sense to be more cautious and carefully open up these sectors and have a more comprehensive agreement, the kind of agreement we have had with UK, than to just quickly rush into any kind of agreement with US. So I think India will remain careful and cautious, and that's what government officials have been highlighting.
Right, right. Gaurav, back to you again. You were mentioning that it is, of course, a massive negotiating tactic that the US is using. And Rajani was saying that a more comprehensive, cautious, and slow approach would be the need of the hour. But, given the kind of hostility by way of these remarks, given the fact that India has shown stellar growth rate, especially over the years, do you see India and the United States actually sitting down at a table? Remember, there's been so much bonhomie between both President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, and yet for the US president to make a comment like this, even at a time when India is only growing from strength to strength, is there potential at all for both countries to actually sit down at the negotiating table and iron out any prospective deal going forward?
I think there's enough and more than enough potential. This is a tactic by President Trump. He can change very quickly. If, let's say, he agrees with the terms of negotiation that India offers subsequently, then the tone will change very quickly. It's a negotiating tactic of being very aggressive in the first step. I think it's a good sign that India is taking its time, that India is trying to ensure that the terms of agreement are beneficial to us and that we are protecting our labor intensive agriculture sector where more than 40% of our population is employed, that we are being careful and we are not being pushed in a corner to just reach an agreement. And as Rajni said, the exposure of India to the US tariff tension compared to other Asian countries is much lower. We are a domestic demand driven economy. For us, it's more important how our domestic consumption, how our domestic investment cycle performs. We are a net importer on a net basis. So, yes, this is a dampener. It does represent a temporary negative impact on growth, but it's a very small amount. Only 2% of our exports to US as a proportion of our GDP. More importantly, so we can take our time and agree to terms which are mutually beneficial, like we were able to achieve in that carefully crafted deal with the UK. Definitely, and also another fact, for the US companies themselves, they will not want to lock themselves out from a country like India, which is potentially the largest consumer base that is available currently with positive demographics. For example, if you look at, let's say, China, they have negative demographics. India, for the next 20 to 25 years, our working age population will continue to rise. Our median will continue to go younger and younger. And I don't think any US based company will want to lock itself out. So it's just a negotiating tactic. And it's, I would say, pretty good chance that India is able to get a deal as long as we protect our own interests, especially in certain labor intensive and critical sectors like agriculture, dairy, and also the pace at which we reduce tariffs. For example, in the UK deal, we offered the UK on 90% of our imports from them zero tariff barriers, but we are doing it in a phased manner to give our company some protection. I think that is key, and it's key that we stick to it. So definitely, we do expect a deal, but maybe it's a little more protracted given the pushback from the US.
Right. And Rajni, if I could just come in with you here for a bit and maybe let you have the last word. I know for a fact that Gaura said it will be a more protracted timeline in terms of the US and India arriving at a deal. But if India were to play to its strengths, mainly economic strengths as far as this context is concerned, what do you think would be the three focus areas for our country to focus on really when it comes to doubling down and digging its heels deep in and talking about with regard to some key areas that we know are our strengths and areas that we want to focus on in any sort of prospective negotiation with the US as far as a trade deal goes?
So some of the important things would be one, not just to look at tariff related issues, but beyond that. So one would be non-tariff barriers. That's something which India should look at closely because if we see in the past that developed countries have used that as a tool to restrict a lot of exports from emerging economies, including India. So that would be an important aspect to look at. Second, definitely services export. So we have to see what kind of how do we get in that clause that ensures that we also get an edge because that's where India has an edge in its services exports. So to ensure that we continue to enjoy that benefit, that would be important. Also, it would be important, like I said, to look beyond tariff. So look at technology transfer, encourage how do we get more investment into the economy. So it should look at these aspects also apart from lowering of tariff, which would be the most obvious thing. But beyond that, what else do we look at in terms of, like I said, technology, investment, services, export? As migration of people is concerned, developed countries have become very, very sensitive towards that. So I think that's not something which we should be, very, very particular about because that's something which is very difficult to get from a developed economy. But as long as, we get other benefits in terms of our services exports getting further inroads into these economies and we are getting technology and investment from developed economies, that should be a good tactics, I feel.
Well, we leave it there. Gaura and Rajani, thank you so much for joining us with those perspectives. Great to have you with us.